Hello, everyone. It's Jordyn Smith, the voice and the astrologer for this YouTube channel, Nonconformist Conscience. And this is another episode of the Arcane Astrology Talks where I get together with another astrologer, whether it be a friend or someone I admire. Um, and we talk about the things that are arcane that maybe are not quite as understood or they're misunderstood or maybe not even talked about as much. And we give reverence for that and hopefully we plant some seeds. So this is just another conversation of two astrologers jamming out to something very cool, in my opinion. And today I have the beautiful Natasha Kealoha. I don't even know. Okay, Kealoha. There we go. And she is going to be here to talk about Eris and Chiron, which I find fascinating. I know that the people who watch this channel are going to be really intrigued by this because I don't ever talk about Eris. I'm going to be learning from you today too, as I mentioned, which is something I love whenever people come on here. Selfishly, I'm like, oh, yeah, like, please help me connect some dots here. And so I'm going to give it away to you, Natasha. And if you want, you can, speak a little bit about yourself. You don't have to. It's whatever you feel comfortable with. If you want to just jump right in, then go ahead. And I'll be here asking questions along the way.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Jordyn. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me on your
Absolutely.
channel. And when you had reached out to me, to potentially meet, I loved just the premise of your whole show, like talking about like the often misunderstood or the hidden aspects of astrology, which is something that I absolutely love that I can talk for days on end about. And so there was that immediate connection. And I also love that, you have this platform to talk about these things because I really believe, talking about these aspects of astrology that are hidden or misunderstood, and we talk about them more, it starts to evolve the whole premise of astrology and how we see it and how we
Yes,
interact with it. So I'm super excited to dive in
me
with you
too.
today. Just a little bit about me. I'm an astrologer. I've always been into astrology since I was a child. I know when we met, we had a lot of connections
Yeah.
and similarities in our stories. And so I am deeply grateful to be able to do what I do. I feel really passionate about astrology and astronomy and how we can use that to deepen our own understanding of ourselves, of each other, and also just navigate this human experience that we're in.
Yes.
And again, kind of going back to when you first reached out to me and like a topic that we could talk about. It's funny, this particular conjunction, like you had mentioned, it's the Chiron Eris conjunction that we're going to be experiencing 3 times exactly, starting in May. And this was the only thing that popped into my head and just stayed with me, like to be able to talk about with you. And I'm
That's a
like,
good
okay,
sign.
yeah, I'll take that instruction and I'll run with it. So I guess we'll just dive in first to Eris, because she's just the loudest for me currently. And so Eris is, I believe she's a Greek goddess of discord and chaos. She's also considered like the goddess of strife. And it's funny whenever I bring her up in readings, there can be like a big shift in energy when I bring up her name and her title, because chaos and discord and strife sounds like a lot, and
Yeah,
it is honestly.
it sounds scary.
It does sound scary, and there can be a lot of fear that comes up with her particular placement, but it's really about facing that fear and really moving through it rather than being controlled by it or like, shrinking in the face of it. And so kind of going back to when I first knew about Eris was actually through a master class that my primary astrology teacher was teaching. Her name's Divine Harmony. Absolutely love her work. And so her Eris masterclass, I believe, is called Eris, the Archetype of the 21st Century. I think you can actually still go purchase her Eris masterclass on her website, which is divineharmony.com. Highly recommend it
I'll link it in the
If
description. Don't worry.
If you feel called to connect in with Eris, that is a really good jumping off point. And so when I was taking her class, My first interaction with Eris, rather than just being just solely focused on the discord and the chaos and the strife, what Harmony had mentioned was that Eris's energy really just kind of connects us into unveiling the chaos and the discord that is already present, rather than her just creating it on a whim because she's bored.
Yeah.
And so there is this kind of revelatory energy that comes with Eris. And so Eris actually mythologically was the catalyst for the Trojan War. She was, I believe she wasn't invited to a wedding that was like the gathering of gods and goddesses. And so there was this almost like wounding that came up for Eris in her myth too, about not being invited or not feeling like she belonged. And so she brought I think it was a golden apple, and threw it to some goddesses and said, like, this is to the fairest, or it belongs to the fairest. And that actually started this huge competition between three main goddesses. I believe it was Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. And so they started warring over this particular apple. And so I think it was Aphrodite who actually promised Helen of Sparta to this brother in Troy. But Helen was already married. And
Okay.
so then that was this whole kind of catalyst for this war that we see in, the Trojan War legend. So there is again kind of that sense of, betrayal or feeling not misunderstood with Eris, but then also she kind of unveiled this competition piece that was already kind of like brewing between goddesses and gods.
Yeah.
They like go at each other's throats mythologically a lot, which can be symbolism for, humans that do the same.
Absolutely. I This is why I love getting into the myths, the origin stories, and then having to suss out like the natural truths and then the bottom line archetypes. This reminds me a little bit even of like Medusa, right? There
Mm-hmm.
are flavors within Eris's story that are similar to Medusa in the sense, from what I'm hearing, of Medusa was like viewed as absolutely gorgeous,
Mm-hmm.
and there was lots of jealousy.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was, demonized essentially for her beauty. And
Mm-hmm.
then she was scapegoated for something that wasn't even hers. It was someone else needing to take accountability for what they did to her, but
Mm-hmm.
she was the person who took the accountability. And the reason why I bring this up is because she was um essentially, kicked out. Like
Mm-hmm.
she had to go live in isolation,
Mm-hmm.
and it was because she didn't want to hurt anyone.
Yeah.
Her nature was actually just super sweet and kind. And it was, the stories are talked about her in such a distorted way.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds to me like with Eris, there can be these wounds around not belonging or not being seen for who you are. I mean, I think of Cassandra as another
Right.
one that we
Mm-hmm.
see this because these are patriarchal stories that
Mm-hmm.
have this essence of natural law within them, or what can happen, the psychological and emotional toll that it takes on someone when these very human dynamics play out. But it's Medusa has the dynamic of women being pitted against women as well. And then it
Mm-hmm.
sounds like Eris has this dynamic of a patriarchal nature too.
Yeah.
Um, but yet it sounds to me like Eris is catalytic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
She's revealing there's a Scorpio dimension that it sounds that she has to me.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I don't really know anything about her, so you tell me. These are
Yes.
just me kind of,
Mm-hmm.
um, but that can often happen, I think, in our lives whenever we are the person who um, creates some type of action, and it becomes catalytic to peel back the curtain, like on The Wizard of Oz, to these hidden dynamics that no one else was seeing,
Yep.
And then what
Mm-hmm.
ends up happening, I feel like time and time again, is people don't want to look at that. So then
Yep.
they'll end up projecting onto, I would say, probably Eris, just like
Mm-hmm.
they did with Medusa or
Right.
Cassandra or,
Yes.
whoever, to scapegoat or to not have to take accountability for actually what was already going on inside of them.
Yes.
And so I'm starting to fill this vibe out now as you
Yeah.
talk about her. So
Yes.
continue on. I love
Incredible. Yes, everything that you said is so spot on to Eris. And I love that you brought up there's like a Scorpio dimension to her as well. And I truly believe that too, because just like a little bit about her backstory of like when the actual planet was discovered. So she was discovered back in 2005. And it's like when astronomers discovered her, they realized that her size was similar to Pluto's. And that was actually her discovering Eris was actually this whole, I don't really like this word, but that demotion or like where Pluto got demoted from planet to dwarf planet.
yeah.
And so Eris was considered a dwarf planet and Pluto's considered a dwarf planet. And then also what's interesting is that Ceres, which was considered an asteroid for a very long time, when Eris was discovered, Ceres was the similar size to Pluto and to Eris. So she got promoted from asteroid to dwarf planet. So
Yeah.
there was this very interesting kind of like piece that kind of came in with even just the discovery of Eris and the naming of her, because it was like Pluto, which represents the planet of power, the lord of the underworld, like this really deep
Yeah.
connection to like death and rebirth and power. Pretty much took several seats. And then Ceres, which is like the great mother and like the mother to Persephone, rose up to almost like be equal and no longer
Yeah.
like below or beneath or subordinate to this kind of masculine.
I think that falls right on track, though. I mean, for people who know this story about the abduction of Persephone and
Mhm.
Ceres being her mother and how she was abducted by Hades,
Yeah.
Pluto,
Hmm.
um, that one, whenever I think about them having to come to equal terms now, he got demoted, they're both here now.
Hmm.
It's fascinating to think about because this is a representation, if you think about it objectively, that women and men are equal.
Hmm.
There is no this or that.
Hmm.
And I love that you brought this piece in because this just validates kind of what we're talking about. What you brought up is that Eris is catalytic.
Hmm.
She revealed this through even her discovery, and now everyone is having to come to terms with the masculine and the feminine being equal.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
yeah, so
Yep.
continue
Yep.
on. There's
Yeah. And
so many
yeah.
pig trails we could
Right.
go on with that.
Right.
Like,
Right. And it was, I mean, if we think back to the early 2000s, that was a very interesting time to be alive. Actually, I think any era of being
yeah,
human was a very interesting time to be alive. But really, we could see that kind of like dehumanization of, or like the disempowerment of the feminine for sure
yeah.
in, the 90s and the early 2000s. And then like there was this flip that happened. And I think it was interesting that there's flip started happening once she was discovered.
Absolutely. Again, she was catalytic. And
Hmm.
I absolutely agree with you around that period of time. It's almost like there was an involution that took place
Hmm.
during that time
Hmm.
around women, especially within pop culture, what was being
Yep,
reflected back to
exactly.
us. Me and you grew up
Yes.
in this era of
Hmm.
we were the last generation who spent, your parents told you to get inside when the porch lights came on,
Right.
right? Or the
Yep.
street lights came on.
Yep.
Um, no cell phones. I think my oldest
Right.
sister had a pager and that's it. We had to go to
Right.
the mall to get it, right? Like
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
not there was none of this stuff that we have
Right. Right.
now. It was like a
Yep.
department store.
Right.
Anyway, but the music and what was being portrayed in the media of women
Hmm.
um was definitely submission of women and also the um what is the word I'm looking for? The viewing of women as objects, I would
Hmm.
say. And
Yep.
so I like that you even brought this up that what was going on during this time because
Hmm.
this did flip that,
Yeah.
it was
Hmm.
reflecting the flip that was just about to occur. So
Yep.
thank
Yeah.
you. Love
Yes.
it.
Yeah. And I love, it still blows my mind that this happens, like in astronomy and astrology, and, just kind of like the myths that really come to the forefront when things are discovered and named. I feel like there's a sense of magic to it all, honestly.
There is.
And yeah, and so with Eris, when she was discovered, she was in Aries. She's still currently in the tropical sign of Aries. And I think she first shifted into Aries, tropical Aries back in the 1920s. And she's transiting Aries for like 100 years. And so we're really getting, a lot of information from this particular tropical lens that Eris is in currently. And so I love that you had
That's
picked up on the
fascinating.
scorpionic piece
Yeah,
to it because Mars is linked to Scorpio
Scorpio,
anciently, and then
the
also
little
he is.
brother.
Mhm,
In my opinion, that makes so much sense too, because when we think of the ages and the sub ages, I know a lot of people think that we're like in the Aquarius age. That's not
mhm,
happening for like another 400 years. Right
mhm.
now, we're in that pivotal moment right before where things get a little bit, not a little bit, a lot of bit crazy.
Yeah.
In order, because here in this plane of existence, it takes an extreme to counteract extremes.
Hmm. Hmm.
And extremes are Libra. The polarity of that is
Hmm.
Aries.
Yeah.
And it takes action or anger if it's constructively
Hmm.
utilized. It sounds like she could
Hmm.
have something to deal with that, how you empower
Hmm.
yourself through these like kind of demonized emotions that are actually naturally occurring, like anger, rage, or hate,
Yeah.
or this or that.
Hmm.
Um, but it's to me, it's when she came in, it's almost like she was being the catalyst through that action, Aries,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, to start to try to wake people up so that
Yes.
way we can move into the Aquarian age a few hundred years from now.
Hmm. Hmm.
Collective enlightenment isn't gonna happen. Sorry, folks. It's just not.
Yes.
That
Hmm.
we're think
Hmm.
about us as humans. It's not.
Right.
But it sounds like she's really initiating
Yeah.
Aries, this
Hmm.
kind of dynamic of now how are we going to utilize this and how bad does it have to get? And then can we utilize certain types of energy dealing with a Martian or Aries dynamic in a way that can be catalytic and a natural expression is
Hmm.
kind of what I'm getting out of what you're talking
Yeah,
about too.
totally. Yes. And when she, she's really activating this Aries lens in a really cool way. And I love that you brought in Libra too, because I was looking at some old, articles and some old, like almost even message boards, which I think
Yeah.
we talked about in our first meeting, like going back to, old message
I
boards.
love old message boards.
Yes, yes,
Wealth of information.
so much
Yeah.
information in those boards. And so
Yeah.
some astrologers or even some people that were just ruminating on Eris believe that she could actually be a co-ruler of Libra,
Oh, okay.
which I think is so fascinating because when she was, because mythologically, again, she is Aries or Mars's sister. And so when she was discovered, there was this sense in the astrological community that the divine feminine warrior archetype was reawakened or starting to turn back on in the consciousness of humanity. And so where, the feminine was really relegated to just nurturing, to the mother archetype for, just being soothing and passive and all these
Yeah.
things, there was this fierceness to the divine feminine that was like pretty much disconnected in a lot of the myths that we see in the mainstream today. But
Hmm.
with Eris's activation and calling back into, the consciousness of humanity, that the feminine is also fierce and
Yeah.
connected to,
It's got
yeah,
an Amazonian type of
sure.
vibe to her,
Hmm.
I would
Hmm.
say.
Yeah,
I love
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Or a
And
Lilith vibe too. I mean,
oh, for sure. Yeah,
truly.
I feel like they're linked in some way too, because they're really these goddesses that reveal the shadow and
Yeah.
have this courage to be able to deep dive into it so that you can work with it and acknowledge it and heal it or whatever it is that you want to do rather
Yeah.
than say run away from it. And so with Eris too, what's interesting is I love to work with true sky or the living sky as well, like kind of bringing in the astronomical piece.
Yeah.
And so she is currently in tropical areas, like I mentioned, but in the true sky, so like where she is right now. So just kind of giving a kind of like more of a backstory on that. So tropical astrology is really connected to the seasons,
Mhm.
specifically in the northern hemisphere, and it doesn't necessarily reflect what's happening in the living sky. And now that doesn't denounce the power of tropical astrology at all. I feel like there's a lot of debate in the astrological communities about what's right and what's wrong. I feel like you can get a wealth of information from any that you resonate with. And so I believe that it's beautiful to weave in tropical and then also weave in the living sky. So where Eris currently is right now, she's actually in the constellation Cetus or Cetus, which is
Mhm.
the whale. And so I thought this was fascinating because Cetus is current, like it's one of the few constellations that's right on the celestial equator, which is this invisible line that's said to divide the northern hemisphere from the southern hemisphere. So we can see Cetus like at different times of the year in the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere.
Mhm.
But if you're actually at Earth's equator, Cetus can actually be at the tip top part of the sky because it's right in the middle. And
Yeah.
so I thought that it was interesting that Eris is in this constellation that's literally at the equinox point, almost like this
Yes.
equator point, which is all about balance,
Hence the
which is
Libra.
Libra.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's
Wild.
fascinating. I
Yeah.
think one thing I do want to touch on,
Mhm.
like, I want to get your feel for this because this is something that I think about. Because I think you feel the same way I do that we want to give voice to these feminine energies that are really viewed as scary or bad or
Yeah.
wrong, this, that, or the other. I find with these more fierce, divine feminine archetypes, they like I would say Medusa, Hecate, Eris, there's numerous of them, but the ones that are looked at as demonic, bad, yeah,
Villainized.
all
Yeah.
of this that, you know, yeah, you just hear horror things anytime like Medusa's connected to alcohol and like
Right.
all of that, like
Right. Yeah.
evil,
Hmm.
right? What I find is that this is like that's what actually intrigues me so much about
Hmm.
these because I'm like, no, I'm not going to take someone's word for this. What I find with these specific energies, with asteroids or, uh, whatever, is there's an expression that comes to mind is that these are the archetypes that what you think is poison is actually potion.
Hmm.
And it's how you constructively utilize it to turn it into potion,
Yep.
right?
Hmm.
So that's just, don't you have that sense or
Yeah.
that feeling too about
Oh,
these?
definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I love going back, like similar to you, I love going into or at least trying to find the original myths about goddesses. Because, like Lilith or like an Eris or, Hecate or some goddesses in that similar vein where they're really villainized in mainstream, like either pop culture or even mythology. I
Yeah.
realized as I was, because that's one of my loves is to go in and try to find the original myths, is the more villainized a goddess is in her mainstream myth, the more power she held in her original myth.
The more natural she was, the more undistorted she
Right.
actually was. Like
Yeah.
whenever I think of, again, probably going to bring her up again, but Medusa, like
Hmm.
that story written by a man,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And it really, I feel like these powerful energies that, like you said, have been villainized, they if we were to look at through the feminine perspective or the feminine lens, it's like, how is no one else, like, I think even women in general, we're like, how's no one else seeing this, right? Like, like, are you seeing that?
Hmm. Hmm.
Like, these are those types of stories that when you actually get to the original myth, they are atrocious. Like, I think
Hmm.
whenever I did a video over Medusa, I was like, this is one of the myths that probably pisses me off the most.
Hmm.
Like, if you
Hmm.
really read it for what it
Hmm.
is, it's like, no, she was very loving and like,
Hmm.
all of these things. And it sounds like Eris is like this too.
Hmm.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah. And I love that you keep bringing in Medusa too, because with Satis specifically, which is where Eris currently is in the constellation in the
Mhm.
living sky, Satis was considered a monster, but it was actually a whale. And and I think like the Satis was linked to the like trying to kill or eat Andromeda, who was like chained to a rock.
Hmm.
And then Perseus came in and killed Satis, and I also know he killed Medusa.
Tusa, yeah.
And so there's this like this villainization or like making these creatures or these goddesses into something evil or bad so that the oftentimes male hero of the mainstream mythology comes in and either beheads or kills or
Yeah.
maims, which can be seen as killing off more of the divine feminine. And so, where Eris is right now in that Satis constellation, I feel like she's doing more of that work of really uncovering more of that original natural power of the divine feminine
Yeah.
and really get to go in and inspect our own relationship to these myths that
Yeah.
are like huge and the ones that people really kind of know the most about, which usually
Hmm.
is killing off the
Yeah.
goddess or the creature or yeah.
Well, and I'm wondering too, now that we're talking, there's so many of these asteroid goddesses right now, that are about, like, I think of Aletheia, um, which really helps us come back to our soul nature by holding up a mirror, or helps us to remember things that we've forgotten about our
Mm-hmm.
nature.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think Hecate moved into, so Hecate, Aletheia, Juno, and Medusa are all in Sag right now, which
Mm-hmm.
means that even if not um by degree, but by sign,
Mm-hmm.
that Eris is training these
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
ladies.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think
Mm-hmm.
that that's fascinating that
Yeah.
these are the
Yeah.
ones we're talking about.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and there is this other piece to Eris's energy too, where I started working with kind of that whole idea of her unveiling what is hidden or like what's already been
That's
chaotic.
right. Because this is
And
where me and you had that conversation
mhm,
about, man, we're gonna have to look up where Aletheia is in tandem with Eris now. There
okay.
is this that vibe of
Hmm.
Aletheia is known as disclosure, and that was the word
Uh,
that you said to me about
yes.
Eris when we
Hmm.
first chatted. I was like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, hey, have you ever heard of this asteroid?
Right? Yes. Yeah. So there is, I mean, there's so many signs that are pointing to that we are in a time of disclosure right now, and it's amplified.
Absolutely.
Even just looking at the Chinese zodiac of 2025 is the serpent.
Yes.
And serpent energy is definitely linked to disclosure and revealing what is hidden and revealing secrets.
Yes.
And also just doing my own research and my own connection in with Eris, I started really getting into like whistleblowing charts. So like these big events that were like,
I
are
did that with Cassandra. I have so
interesting.
many of those. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Eris is super prominent almost like 99% of the time at like when I'm watching a movie that's like connected to like a true story of like whistleblowing or read like
Yeah.
a article on whistleblowing, I have to look up the chart to
Mm,
see where Eris is.
absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. And so Eris more often than not is huge in these charts of like really speaking up and sharing what's been going on in the shadows. And so there is this revelatory piece that comes
Yeah.
with Eris. And I believe actually Eris is because she was discovered in 2005, she is deeply connected to like, this 21st century, which I believe is why Harmony named her masterclass the way that she did.
Yeah.
But I really feel like because Eris takes such a long time, she has a huge long orbit. I think it takes her 550 plus years to
Hmm.
complete an entire orbit around the sun. And so she just hangs out in one part of the sky for a very, very long period of time.
That's so
And
the catalytic nature of, hey, got to take an
right.
action, and what is this going to reveal? Like,
Right? Yes.
that's
And
that.
yeah. And so her just like really hanging out in these certain parts of like just in, Aries and tropical Aries for such a long time that she's often overlooked in
Yeah.
astrology as well, because it's like, oh, well, she's not really doing anything, which is hilarious because I think she does a lot. Because Eris energy to me, when I was connecting in with it, is just not subtle. She's not subtle. She's like this activist, like I'm going to actually share what has been happening
Yeah.
behind the scenes. And with Eris though, it's really interesting because so back in like 2020, there was this huge astrological alignment with Eris and Pluto. So Eris squared Pluto 5 times exactly, beginning in January of 2020. And now
Mhm.
I don't have to describe to anyone what happened in
No,
2020,
no.
but Eris, this goddess of disclosure and truth telling and like revealing the chaos that's been hidden for long periods of time, squaring the Roman god of the underworld and like, also being connected to disclosure and revealing secrets. And that
Yeah.
square aspect is kind of that catalyst energy
Hmm.
of like what's been hidden, I can't ignore it anymore, so it's going to come up. So
Yeah.
Eris has really been huge in this last, I would say 2020, I would say she's huge in this entire decade. So we're
Yeah.
in a huge decade of Eris revealing a lot of things.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. I There was something I was gonna mention. It'll come to me.
Yes.
Keep going and I'll
Okay.
bring it. I'll tap in
Tap
and
in. Okay. Perfect. So now with was that everything that I wanted to mention with Eris? Yes. So I'm going to bring in Chiron really quickly because
yes.
now Chiron and Eris are doing the stance. So just like Pluto and Eris were doing the stance in 2020 through 2021, now Chiron's dancing with Eris, which is a very interesting energy because Chiron is the wounded healer, correct?
Yeah.
And so Chiron has actually been really huge in the astrology lately in the last couple of years. We just had that exact total solar eclipse with Chiron exactly conjunct the sun and the
All of
moon.
that was combust together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, on I believe it was like April 8th, 2024 or something like that was
Mhm.
that total solar eclipse with Chiron energy.
1943, 19 degrees, 43 minutes. That's what I
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah. And so Eris has been in her part of the sky, and then Chiron's been making this approach to her. So
Yeah.
even though we haven't experienced the exact conjunctions yet or the exact alignments of Chiron and Eris, we've been getting downloads about it. And we've been experiencing this
Yeah.
incoming alignment. And so
Yeah.
Chiron is the, civilized centaur mythologically, and
Mhm.
he's seen as like a teacher and a guide, and he's also, I believe, like mythologically linked to heroes. Like he's like the teacher of heroes, which is fascinating to
Yeah.
me because we were just talking about Perseus and like,
Hmm.
this, I feel like this is where we get to really go and redefine what hero means and what that looks like for everyone.
Agreed.
um yeah, but with Chiron, he, I believe, like at one point in his story, he had like an arrow that like pierced his skin that was like poisoned with like the Hydra's blood or something like that. And so from that wound, because he was immortal, he couldn't die from this particular, poisoned,
Yeah.
yeah, arrow. But because he couldn't die, that actually made him become even more adept at healing because he completely understood people's suffering
Suffering.
and
Yeah.
their pain. And so Chiron astrologically can be linked to some of our deepest wounding, but
Yes.
also he is this huge piece to our own healing journey. Should we start to actually, just like you had mentioned, having like that poison become almost the
Oh,
cure or the antidote
yeah.
or the medicine.
Hmm.
And what I love about Chiron's glyph too is that in astrology, it's a key. And
Hmm.
I always loved that symbolism that came with Chiron because it shows that we actually have always held the own key to our relationship to our own wounding, but also unlocking that door to our own healing path. So,
Yes.
yeah. So that's just
I love that.
yeah.
I also think that this is, in my, what I've seen, my perception or my thoughts around Chiron is definitely people link him to Virgo for sure,
Yeah.
which goes along with that, being of service,
Hmm.
also knowing, being in touch with one's own suffering. That's why anyone who has a lot of sixth house or Virgo kind of dynamics or a strong Chiron, if it's naturally expressed, they are the people who talk and speak for the underdogs because on
Hmm.
some level they know what it's like to be there, to experience persecution, judgments, things of that nature that I
Yeah.
think of with a Virgoan dynamic. But the other thing is that I think is fascinating about this conjunction, all
Hmm.
right, is Chiron, when we think of Virgo, we think of sadomasochism too, right?
Hmm.
Which
Hmm.
runs rampant here.
Hmm. Hmm.
Masochism, like I'm feeling guilty for, you know, something I shouldn't be. I think of women who simply feel guilt because they're trying to hold a boundary and they don't
Yeah.
want to say no to anyone. So there's
Mm-hmm.
like the subservience and the feeling
Mm-hmm.
guilty if
Mm-hmm.
you aren't subservient,
Mm-hmm.
and keeping this in mind with Eris here.
Mm-hmm.
And then also it can be the sadism quality of, I am guilty of something, but I don't want to take accountability. So I'd
Mm-hmm.
rather project and humiliate someone instead, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
I was the victim and now I'm becoming the perpetrator kind of
Right.
dynamic.
Yeah.
And it's a psychology that runs rampant
Yeah.
everywhere. It's pervasive.
Right.
It's how we are conditioned, and
Yeah.
people talk about it more.
Yeah.
What I find interesting with Chiron is my mentor, he taught me a long time ago, and I find this very interesting and it resonates, is Chiron isn't only where we are wounded, but it's where we can also be the
Mm.
wounding.
Mm-hmm.
Especially with Chiron and Aries, or
Mm-hmm.
Chiron like in someone's first house, it's like I'm wounded, now I'm doing the wounding. I'm wounded, now
Mm.
I'm doing the wounding. So
Mm-hmm.
it's that kind of back and forth dynamic. And the reason why I bring this up is there's something catalytic going on here with the two of them um, about to conjoin.
Mm-hmm.
And we just had Mars retrograde in Cancer,
Yep.
where we were really meant to get intimately in touch with our emotional triggers, to act
Mm-hmm.
on our desires, to cultivate new emotional patterns in our life in
Yeah.
order to mature,
Mm-hmm.
in order to be responsible, to learn how to be responsive and not reactive.
Mm-hmm.
And I have this feeling, anything in the cardinal archetypes,
Mm-hmm.
right? You initiate and it freaks you out, so you backslide and then you go
Right.
forward.
Right.
But then there's also this dynamic of, you know, Capricorn always gets any of the cardinal archetypes, you're going to pull in all of them.
Mm-hmm.
There can
Mm-hmm.
be the extremes that play out before you come into an awareness, or you cultivate new choices, or, I
Right.
think all of the things, or you become more secure within yourself. But Capricorn, at different evolutionary junctures, when there's a cardinal sign, um, planet being very activated, as we're talking about, is it can draw in that Capricornian test.
Mm-hmm.
And the Capricornian test is around self-determination, and self-determination around what? When we're thinking about this, when something gets triggered, to be self-determined to not be who we once were before, to
Mm-hmm.
take the wisdom of the past and make a correct judgment. So I have a sneaking suspicion that this is going to get brought into this conjunction around
Mm-hmm.
woundings and revealing and catalytic. And
Mm-hmm.
it can really, like you said, she has this, to me, from everything you're saying, a very catalytic nature, very scorpionic. And whenever something is infused with that energy, to me, that's where we have to come face to face with, is this who I am, or is this who I can't be? And
Yes.
so I just,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
And
the,
yes, everything that you said. And I love that bit you just said too, where it's like coming face to face with, because I believe coming face to face with anything, honestly, especially if it's things that we've been running away from for who knows
yeah,
how long,
or
is
evoke those things that we want to keep down.
suppress.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah. And coming face to face with this, either just usually it's aspects of the self, because that's,
yes,
Chiron's deeply connected to, our personal psyches, and like going into
absolutely.
that area of, shadow or discomfort or pain or all of those things.
Yeah,
Again, we're going to back to I want to go back to that key reference, because like this is where we get to open that door to come face to face, or do we continue running away
yeah.
from the thing
Or
that's
feeling
coming?
victimized or whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And with Eris too, I forgot to mention this when we were discussing her. So back in 2020, this was like when I was still really kind of brand new into like introducing myself to planets and all of that. Because at that point I was very academic minded, so very
Yeah.
coming from the Western mindset. But I had this really big inclination to meditate with Eris, and I am I don't normally meditate like by, choice, but
Yeah.
I think she was just making a call. She was like knocking on my door. So
Yeah.
I sat there and I asked her before I went into meditation, can you please reveal to me what your true essence is, like what your true nature is beyond what everyone kind of
The
categorizes
distortion.
her
Yeah.
as? Yeah. And so the imagery she gave me was so clear and so potent. I mean, this happened like 5 years ago, and I can still see exactly what she showed me and also remember what I felt when I was witnessing what she was showing me. So if you can envision, like what Eris showed me. So if you can envision yourself out on the open ocean and there's no land in sight, you're not on a boat, and there's this huge storm that's raging. So there's like torrential downpours, there's gale force winds, there's like tsunami type waves.
Yeah.
And if you stay at the surface, you're gonna get tossed. You feel like you're gonna drown, like you're gonna die if you're like right at the surface level.
Hmm.
Now, what she showed me though is if you hold your breath and you go under the waves, the sense of peace that came with that imagery that she showed me was huge because my entire body relaxed. And
Yeah.
so the way that I translated that energetic feeling that I was feeling in my body was when we no longer try to make the truth into something that it's not, true acceptance is had. So how I again translated that energy was I also see Eris ultimately as the goddess of acceptance. And
Mm.
acceptance sounds like, very pretty. We can think of it like, oh yeah, like, how much work I've done on like accepting these things. But when we do the true work of the things that we have not accepted
Yeah.
for who knows how long, takes a lot of work to fully accept a truth. Um,
Yes.
yeah, about the self, about others, about situations that we've experienced.
Absolutely.
And so I think it's interesting that if we put, Eris as the goddess of acceptance being conjunct Chiron, the wounded healer, there
Mm.
is this invitation for everyone
Yeah.
to have we fully accepted our own story? Have we fully accepted what we've been through, what we've experienced, and
Yeah.
really listen to the answers that come up for that?
Yeah. Or I would even say because Aries and Mars it's so much about our choices.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that I think that people forget that this isn't like to be like, um, this is just a natural truth, okay?
Yeah.
People can take it or leave it. We choose what we are born into. We
Mm-hmm.
make choices about our relationships. We make choices about what we desire to do, to go after, to you know, everything. Everything amounts to desire. Aries,
Mm-hmm.
Mars.
Mm-hmm.
And our desire is linked to our choices.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that part of this piece around our wounding is also accepting or taking accountability, responsibility for our own choices that we've
Mm-hmm.
made,
Yeah.
even if we didn't understand them at the time of where they were going to lead us to or
Right.
whatnot. Because there's things that I have experienced personally. I have Chiron and Cancer, all right, in my
Mm-hmm.
second house. It opposes all
Mm-hmm.
my Capricorn.
Right.
Family stuff. There are
Mm-hmm.
choices that I have personally made. I'm just going to give this example.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that I really wanted to feel victimized about, like
Mm-hmm.
Pluto and the moon in the sixth house and a south node in Virgo,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And the choice that I made was really to liberate myself and to just live authentically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then what was disclosed or the truth that was revealed was that you're not going to be accepted by the people that you love so much. And for a
Mm-hmm.
long time, I would feel very victimized by that, which it is
Mm-hmm.
hurtful. There's a lot of grief, a lot of
Oh, yeah.
pain, around that. But something that I've come into awareness around is exactly what I'm talking about. Like,
Mm-hmm.
my choices actually did lead to that situation.
Mm.
Doesn't mean that it's my fault or,
Right.
like these kind of bad connotations. No,
Yeah.
sometimes it's just accepting what is,
Yes.
right? That's
Mm-hmm.
the medicine of
Mm-hmm.
when I reflect back, yes, that was really hurtful or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
all of the stories I told myself about this, that, or the other. I'm just trying to be me.
Yeah.
When I reflect back, I am so proud of myself.
Yes.
And other people, I've seen this happen with them too. When you really start to look at it like that, like, yes, there can
Hmm.
be wounding that happens by a choice you make, but was it true for you? Was it
Mm-hmm.
honest for you? You
Hmm.
know, like that's where the acceptance comes in of two things can be true at
Yeah.
once. I think we live in like these polar, this
Yeah. Hmm.
binary. And
Yeah.
so just I feel like part of the piece with this conjunction can also be, especially because we're having that Pluto Mars opposition.
Yeah.
Mars just was retrograde. We've got Venus retrograde.
Hmm.
Neptune and Saturn are moving into Aries. Like there's so much going on. Even
Hmm.
with this, it feels like that is the key.
Hmm.
Just we can hold reverence for our path that we've been on, but we also need to hold reverence for the choices we've made, even if the outcome was not
Hmm.
particularly what we wanted. It was exactly what we needed because it
Yeah.
helped us to evolve. And I think
Yes.
that that sounds like it's part of the piece too. And
Oh, definitely.
I think that's why I was feeling called to share this. But
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing, part of like a Chiron story that,
yes,
was happening for you because I really believe even if Chiron, so where Chiron's transiting right now in Aries and he's going to be aligning with Eris, I believe that whenever Chiron is really prominent by transit, he's going to activate anyone's natal Chiron placement, regardless if he's going to aspect it or not. So if people want to tune in to and really kind of inspect or analyze or feel into their own kind of like wounding, say from an astrological perspective,
yeah,
take a look at or feel into your own Chiron placement.
yeah.
And that's also to, not to negate if Chiron's actually aspecting himself in your natal chart. Yeah, you'll definitely,
Yeah, a
be,
Chiron return or whatever. Yeah.
yeah.
Chiron's approaching an opposition to my moon and was just
Mhm.
on my Mars. So lots of
Ah,
things came up,
yeah. Hmm.
But yeah, it's just so I'm actually kind of excited about the Eris Chiron conjunction now
Yes.
because of how we're talking about it.
Yeah, and I also love too that this like with Eris, she's unveiling discord and chaos, which can very much be a really big gift when we're on our own
Yeah.
healing path because she's unveiling the things that might have been happening behind the scenes for
Yeah.
a long time, but she's also disrupting what's been. So
Yeah.
if we've been in just kind of this repetitive pattern with our own wounding for who knows how long and
Yes.
it's hard to get out of a loop, this Eris conjunction's coming through. It's almost similar to like an Uranus vibe where it's like sudden change and
Yeah.
disruption. But it's divine disruption. So it's the disruption that's meant to happen because things need to
Necessary.
actually change. Yes.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
it to me, it seems from especially how you've been talking about her that this can be an initiation to cold that can bring up, Aries and Mars are the conscious desires that are seeded in
Mhm.
from Pluto, the subconscious
Mhm.
desires.
Mhm.
So to me, this almost feels like this could, whatever happens around these areas of your life, it could be catalytic in initiating something erupting from the soul and being,
Mhm.
put into your consciousness for you to actually start to have new desires that are pushing you further on a natural evolutionary
Yeah.
path. And it sounds like it can also bring a different type of awareness around our wounds,
Yes.
especially with Chiron right there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And so I think we had mentioned too in our previous conversation where it's more of the relationship to our own wounding that we really get to shift and work with.
Mhm.
It's not necessarily about having to change the wound. It's about our relationship or interaction to
Yes.
it and also our acceptance of it can also
Yes.
be a piece of it.
This was
Um,
this
yeah,
was this happened
right.
and
Yeah,
it's
that
gonna stay
acceptance piece,
with
I think it's
me.
a huge like invitation to start moving not even beyond, but
Yeah.
through our wounding and being able to go take our next steps
Love it.
where we're no longer defined by the
Yeah.
past. And then also just bringing in where Chiron is in the living sky. So he is in Aries with Eris in tropical, but in true sky, he's in Pisces. So it's really interesting because
Okay.
Eris and Chiron are in the part of the sky, in the living sky, what's considered the celestial sea, which is deeply connected to Pisces and Piscean
Yeah.
energy, and also the fact that Satis is a whale.
Yeah.
And so
That's
there
what
is,
I originally thought when you said that. I was like, oh,
yes,
yeah.
yes. So there is this connection too to it can feel a little ungrounding right now too, around tapping into or leaning into our triggers or going onto our own healing path because you don't need us to say it. There's a lot happening in the collective right now globally, which can
Yes.
also trigger our own wounding, our own responses to things. And so it can feel very like almost like the confusion or the illusion that kind of comes hand in hand with
Hmm.
Piscean placements. But what I love about this, though, is we have this connection into we're weaving Aries and we're weaving Pisces together. So tropical and living sky, which is the first sign of the zodiac, Aries, and then the last sign of the zodiac. So we're really in this completion, new beginnings era.
Yeah.
And Chiron and Eris are really leading this way. And also now that Aquarius is very prominent because Pluto just shifted into that Aquarian sign last year in tropical
Mhm.
astrology. Um, and also Pisces and Aquarius are very linked to group things like groups,
Yes.
communities, all of these things. What I loved about Chiron and Eris coming together in Aries is all about uncovering more of who you truly are, your own individual spark.
Yeah.
And when we move more into the community oriented signs or placements, there can be a lot of amplification of forgetting about who we are and just being part of the group in order to like belong or be loved. And so
Mhm.
there is this piece to Chiron and Eris coming together about really connecting in with who you truly are and sharing it outward, or even understanding who you truly are so you can show up in your communities with your unique gifts and
Yeah.
what who you are. Yeah.
I love that. Well, it goes back to what Eris showed you when you were meditating. I will
Mm-hmm.
tell you, when you told me that, I felt like that was very Piscean, and it
Mm-hmm.
actually connects with exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Which I'm glad that you brought in the living sky and then the
Mm-hmm.
tropical. Um, because when you were talking about your experience with that, um, being on top, everything, there's a deluge going on.
Yeah.
And then if you go under that, it's peaceful. This is something that actually in evolutionary astrology, I will tell you, um, as we evolve, you're learning how you're coming into an awareness through the center of gravity. There's a teaching around the center of
Mm-hmm.
gravity of your consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
and the personality that your soul creates every lifetime in order to
Mm-hmm.
help you out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but at some point on our evolutionary journey, we understand that we're not the wave that's separate from the ocean,
Mm-hmm.
that we are the wave that is part of the ocean. And that
Mm-hmm.
is really what I was thinking about when you were saying
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
And here you are talking about this, Piscean energy, and then also Aries, the state of becoming, but it's also from the cosmic womb, one gets
Mm-hmm.
birthed and
Mm-hmm.
initiated. It's
Mm-hmm.
so Neptune moving into Aries as well, too,
Yeah.
by the way.
Yeah.
Um, like
Which happens this month. Yeah.
right now we're like Neptune and Aries to me is like giving birth and the head is crowning and it's the ring
Mm.
of fire, and then the
Mm.
actual birth is Saturn moving in.
Ah.
Like that to me,
Yeah.
that's the way I've kind of
Yeah.
conceptualized it. I mean, I'm a
Yes.
mom, I've experienced
Yeah.
the fire, so
Yeah.
like I'm like, this is what this feels like, energetically wise.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of pressure, a lot of confusion, a lot of, whatever. But I also like what you said about being part of the community, being one with it, while
Mm-hmm.
also understanding your own unique individuality. It serves a function because Pisces is about universal, timeless laws,
Mm-hmm.
that giving, sharing, and inclusion.
Yeah.
We're all a part of the same thing, and we are all as equally important or unimportant as
Mm-hmm.
the other one. And we all have unique things that we carry that can be medicine for other people. You're on here right now teaching me about Eris. I had no idea. Like,
Right.
I met with,
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know anything about her really. Like, I've heard
Right.
about her,
Yeah.
but please.
Yes.
So it's just
Mm-hmm.
another beautiful reflection of what you're talking about, I feel like.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And And, with weaving more into the Satis piece too, and its connection to kind of almost, I didn't know that Eris was in Satis until
Yeah.
literally like a couple months ago when I was like, where is she actually? Because I forgot to
Yeah.
look. And the fact that she's showing up in the whale constellation was really kind of revealing to me because I had literally just watched this one, I don't even remember the name of the documentary on whales like a couple months ago. And there was a segment on sperm whales and how they dive super, super, super deep in order to, eat or feed. And they do this constantly. And so they're one of the few whales that go to a huge, huge depth in
Yeah.
the
And can
ocean
withstand it.
and can withstand it. And
Yeah.
actually, not only that, they're seeking nourishment in the depths. And so there's this
Wow.
piece with Eris in Satis about like deep diving into the truth, into,
And that you
those.
can withstand it and it'll actually nurture you, which is
Yes.
a very Piscean kind of
Yeah.
dynamic of when you tap into your pure emotion and
Hmm.
you don't, suppress it. The
Yeah.
things that you've been taught that are scary or that the binary of this emotion is okay, but this one isn't. When
Hmm.
you go to those depths, whenever
Yeah.
you take your clothes off,
Yeah.
you're not in a petticoat and boots,
Right.
like you strip down and you dive
Yes.
in,
Hmm.
there is a lot of nourishment that can happen because we evolve through the emotional body,
Yes.
which is
Exactly.
the pure
Hmm.
emotion,
Yep.
Pisces. Which, by
Yep.
the way, on an offshoot, this is something else I wanted to tell you.
Yeah.
I always make thumbnails for the videos I do, and I always include animals because I love that archetype. So it's
Yeah.
always like the cosmos, planets, and animals. The
Mm.
Pisces new moon is a whale that I have on there. So this was just last week. So I
Interesting.
was like, I'm gonna have to send you like the thumbnail
I would
just so you
love
can
that.
see it because you'll
Yes.
be like, oh my gosh. Because this is
Yeah.
what I'm imagining in my head as you talk, by the way. So
Yeah. Yeah.
okay. Is
Yes.
there a slide that you wanted to show?
Yeah, so it was just the slide of actually, I forgot to mention the exact dates that Chiron aligns
Yes,
with
please
Eris
do.
really quickly.
Yeah.
So the three exact dates when Chiron aligns with Eris is May 26th, 2025. The
Coming
second
up.
time will be October 8th, 2025. And then the third time will be March 19th, 2026. So this is taking us into 2026. And what's also interesting is I went back to see how often Chiron and Eris align, like if like what's the pattern there. And so
Yeah.
they align like three times exactly, about every like 53 to 55 years, which I
Okay.
think is so interesting because we have a Chiron return around 4950, and then
Yeah.
Chiron goes and links up with Eris then by transit. So like
Yes.
there is this like, oh, how do I change or like really evolve my relationship to my own wounding on this new
On the
cycle
flip
of
side, yeah,
Chiron?
which
Hmm.
I feel like a lot of times people around this period of their life, the midlife crisis,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Um, this is where not everyone, not people here that I think watch this have experienced it unless you're just now getting into astrology because you
Hmm.
had some crisis happen during your Chiron return or something.
Right,
But
right.
I feel like the majority of the consensus of people at that age, that's where they're starting to determine, like, I've done my work. I just need to
Hmm.
settle down. And
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
if you get this happy little conjunction going on,
Yeah.
it's like, nope, there's more
Right.
work to do here. Like,
Right. Yeah, it's
can't
like
stay stagnant.
right. And I think that's an important piece of Eris
I
energy too, is like this non-stagnation where we're not just bogged down by,
catalytic. Yeah.
yes, exactly. And also just another fun fact about this conjunction. So Eris and Chiron will only align three times, but twice in while they're in Aries. So the last time Chiron and Eris aligned in Aries was in the early 70s. And
Okay.
then the last time they're aligning in Aries is now. And what's so interesting is that that 70s alignment, so it was back in 71 and 72, Chiron and Eris had not been discovered yet. So that wasn't even online yet in our consciousness when that happened. And
Yeah.
then now it is, they're both of them had been discovered and named. And so we're in this energy of being aware
That
of
is
this. alignment
I
with that.
also feel like you're onto something where there's a Uranian kind of energy to her because if we think about what was going on back then, we had Pluto transits to Uranus at that time.
Yep.
And we were coming out of them.
Yep.
And then right now we have Pluto in Aquarius ruled by this Uranus. Um,
Yeah.
and so it's almost as if it's that feeling of the Aquarius square to Scorpio of whatever you've resisted or whatever was hidden or whatever what there was an over identification with something feeling secure that's creating non-growth.
Yeah.
This is that breaking this up,
Yeah.
in order for something to be initiated. I
Yeah.
also love whenever I'm thinking about this, they are, like you said, they are like the forerunners of what's going on right now because into 2026, we're going to have Saturn and Neptune move into Aries and then move back into Pisces. So it's already reflecting that tropical and the lived sky
Yeah.
dynamic that they're in. And then we also have this initiatory thing going on right now with the Mars retrograde ruling them. And now Venus is, retrograde in Aries, but she's about to go back into Pisces. So
Yeah.
this is just fascinating to think about how it all, I love astrology.
Right.
It's just so naturally
Yeah.
like there's a natural unfolding. And whenever you observe it, you get to see how, I don't know, how things are naturally designed,
Right.
through
Yeah.
cycles and just everything,
Yeah. Yeah.
everything is there to really try to help us to evolve, and it's reflecting that.
Yeah. And I
So,
love that it deepens our connection to the planet, to the sky, and it can help us gain perspective when there's a
yes,
lot of chaos going on. It's nice to have the kind of bird's eye view of what's going on with all of the
1,000%.
planets too, that can
Well,
give more information on the things that
and
are
it
happening.
feels like we're held in love by them too. Like,
Totally.
hey,
Yep.
because everything is sentient. Me and you
Yeah.
could talk about
I know.
like we could be out with the fairies right now.
Right. Totally.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Yeah. So let me figure out how I can share my screen.
do it.
Let's see. So, I think I'll share it now.
Yeah. And
Okay,
then we
so
can wrap up if you want,
okay, perfect.
if that's
So,
okay.
yeah,
Okay.
perfect. Yeah. So, I'm gonna press play and hopefully I don't lose connection.
Nope,
Oh,
it's
yay. Okay, I can
perfect.
see it. Okay.
It's
So
perfect.
this is so I use an astronomy software called Sky Guide, and I absolutely love it. I think it's for I had this app on my phone for years, and I absolutely just love it and adore it. And so this is showing you where the true sky placements of where Chiron and Eris are currently. And this was a screenshot I took this morning of where Chiron and Eris are. And so
Mhm.
as you can see here, here's Chiron in the Pisces sign. So it's like a little bit invisible, but Pisces is
Yeah,
right here where Chiron is. And then here is Eris. Right on this blue line is the celestial equator. So she's like on it.
yeah,
And then she's in that Satis whale constellation.
yeah.
And so I just wanted to bring this in because I feel like it's uh for me, it's another way to connect in on a deeper level with the sky of what's
Agreed.
actually happening.
Yeah,
And then, like we said, like weaving in that Aries bit from tropical astrology. So I just wanted to give like a little bit of visual with this particular what was happening
no,
in
I
the sky.
love this. I think that this is brilliant.
Yeah.
Um, and you'll definitely have to give me the links to all of these things. That way I can put them
Okay.
in. That way, if other people they're interested in, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Because I'm
totally.
interested. I have some astronomy software, but
Yeah.
I like the visual of this one.
Yeah, this one I particularly love. I'm not sponsored in any way by this at all. I
Yeah,
just want to mention, but I love that the like because I've used different astronomy softwares through like different apps and stuff on my phone, but this is the clearest one.
yeah,
And it's the one that you can type in any body that you want to see, like astrological body. And it's so clear. That's what I love. And
yeah.
then just to here, I'll stop share. Oop. Okay. Okay, so I just wanted to bring in because I know we were talking about Cassandra earlier too. So
Hmm.
Cassandra's going to be doing something very fascinating at in August. So when she stations retrograde, she'll be 18 minutes from an exact alignment with Eris. So
Yeah.
Cassandra is also joining in the conversation with this Chiron Eris conjunction. And what
Hmm.
I loved too was that Eris and Cassandra are from the Trojan myth, both of
Yep.
them. And so with this Cassandra alignment, Cassandra, you know, you have a deep connection to her. And what I took away from her particular myth and like what came really clear for me with themes was, you know, her being cursed and by Apollo, I believe, and her accuracy on predicting events was spot on, but no one would believe her. I think she even predicted the Trojan War,
It
and no
predicted.
one listened.
They listened to her brother, who
Oh,
then
of
talked
course.
about it afterwards. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so there is this big theme I think we talked about like betrayal and things like that, which could also be kind of mirrored in the Eris, you know, being misunderstood or
Absolutely.
not invited and things like that,
Yeah.
or not belonging. But the biggest piece for Cassandra when I was working with her in my own chart is about do you believe you? Do you believe your accuracy of your own intuitive hits or what you know and what you believe to
Yeah.
be? And so I feel like with this Chiron Eris conjunction, it can activate some wounding around that so that we can get very clear
Yeah.
about sharing what we know or feeling like we have to shrink ourselves because no one might believe us. But
Yeah.
I think that the biggest gift here is us truly believing in our own voice and our own way of
Agreed.
viewing things. Hmm.
I think the other thing is for those who, I mean, Cassandra is always going to be uh, someone who is speaking a truth. It's not
Yeah.
a belief. It's never, never. There's no
Hmm.
distortion around this. This is
Hmm.
always someone who's speaking the absolute truth,
Mm.
and isn't being hurt. Now, if it is distorted, this can be someone who you're speaking the truth and the other person is presenting their side as truth and everyone is believing them and not you, hence the brother
Ah,
and all of this into
yeah.
the myth. But what I want to say is if you're someone and something comes up around this time uh, of this activation, the key with Cassandra that one learns, it's almost spiritual, I would say, truly.
Hmm. Hmm.
The, I mean, there's a reason why in psychology there's a term that's coined the Cassandra complex. It's the
Hmm.
emotional and mental and psychological toll that this can take on someone.
Hmm.
But something that I found through my own um, Cassandra and then working with so many clients
Hmm.
around this dynamic
Hmm.
is, and this is fascinating as I'm speaking this because of this Chiron piece too
Hmm.
coming up, is sometimes we can re-victimize ourselves whenever we don't learn to surrender.
Hmm.
And so Cassandra can have this piece to her where we speak the truth and no one's believing, but we want to keep trying and trying. Let me say it this way, so maybe you'll heal me now.
Right.
Or how do I say it? And that's the re-victimization or re-wounding because you're
Yeah.
hoping finally someone's going to see me, someone's going to believe me.
Yeah.
And so the key with this is to not be over-identified with whatever it is that you have to speak a truth
Mm.
about, to understand that there can be a natural evolutionary lesson of sometimes saying the thing is more about planting a seed,
Mm.
whether it be for this lifetime or the next lifetime. And
Hmm.
whenever we're not identified with the outcome,
Hmm.
there's a lot of healing that can come. And
Yeah.
so that's a lot that's encompassed in her story, I feel like too.
No, I love that. Thank you so much. I just learned so much more about Cassandra with what you just shared. And I love too, because like, you know, she speaks the undeniable truth and she's leaking with Eris, which is the goddess of disclosure
Absolutely.
and acceptance as well. And I loved that this piece of surrendering too, of like, okay, you know what? I've reached my max of being able to share this thing and it doesn't seem like people's getting it. And that's okay.
Hmm.
And I think this is linked to also Chiron and Eris being connected into in the living sky into Pisces and into that like
Absolutely.
surrendering
Yeah.
the
Well, because
outcome. Like I have to have it be this way when I share this truth.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I could not agree with you more. So
And just for note, Cassandra will station retrograde conjunct Eris on August 18th, 2025. So just wanted to
I love
bring
it.
that in.
I love it. Okay, I've had so much fun with you. I feel like me and you could talk for
Sure.
forever.
Yes.
We're definitely gonna talk again.
Yes. Would love to. Would love to.
So I will make sure that I post all the links for you. You're a wealth of information. Um, anyone who wants a reading, she's not an evolutionary astrologer, but I even told her, I was like, hey, do you want to switch readings? And I'm this sounds whatever, but I can be a little picky about
Mhm.
things like this. And so I feel like if you're not into evolutionary astrology, or maybe you want a different, um, viewpoint, I definitely would say go to Natasha.
Thank you
She's a
so much.
wealth of
Mhm.
information, and it's a lot of direct experience information too. It's not just this or that.
Great.
So I wanted to mention that. Of
Thank
course,
you.
again, I'll put all the links. And so until next time.